Air Marshal Rajesh Kumar, Dr. Miran Chadha, General Monu Bhagat, Rita Manchanda, Professor Anuradha Chinoy, and Smriti Patnaik, and my dear friends, distinguished guests. A very warm welcome to ISCOM's celebration of 25 years, which we have a whole lineup of events this year as we celebrate a watershed in our trajectory and journey through, through the corridors of security, conflict resolution, and what is today called peace building. So today is one such event, but with a major difference. It's about women's participation in what used to be considered the exclusively male space of the security sector and the armed forces in particular. To most of you here today, the work that WISCOM does in the areas of foregrounding gender concerns, in interventions on international relations, security, conflict management, and peace is well known. We continue to work across sectors, drawing diverse constituencies across generations to engage with the pressing issues of our times, in expanding the conventional understandings of security to foreground human security, an inclusive perspective on democracy, bringing voices and concerns to the table that are often obscured in the meta-narratives of national security, both globally and nationally. And therefore, we adopt an inclusive, people-centric approach. So what is different in what we do? We try to bring theory and praxis together. We work with academia and CSOs, think tanks, and the policy sector. We like to believe that we are a non-hierarchical space. We are a space where experience and expertise and the potential that young people have to enter this area can come together in a non-hierarchical way, in a dialogic way, which also includes active listening. And we also believe that it's an inclusive space where men and women collaboratively craft a genuinely inclusive and gender just space. And you all know that gender is not just about women. And you'll see that reflected also in the so-called gender balance on our panel today. And we believe in engaging openly with diverse perspectives across the ideological spectrum to provide for genuine pluralism in our dialogic engagements. Also, marginalized groups. So voice and agency is what we prioritize. I'm not here to inundate you with propaganda on WISCOM. You have already seen this clip we presented to you, and we are delighted and we are grateful that you made time to be with us at this event, despite the pollution, despite the traffic, and the competing events of November. I also want to particularly recognize in our midst Dipanjali Bakshi, a soldiering woman who wrote a seminal piece for us as a scholar of peace, and I think your representative now also works with the UN. In many ways, the immediate trigger for this event has been bringing to fruition our special 25th anniversary edition of our journal, Peace Prints, a one-of-a-kind online ISSN recognized journal in South Asia. And this edition is precisely on women and the security sector. It brings together authors with a range of perspectives, both from and on the field, with contributions from senior army officers, some of whom are here with us today, police personnel, feminist authors working on gender and the military complex, defense experts, and UN PKO experts and practitioners. I believe, and excuse me for saying so, I'm rather immodest about it, it's a gem of a collection of 12 substantive contributions with Rita Manchanda as the invited expert editor. We couldn't have asked for a better person. And Seema Kakran, who's Deputy Director, WISCOM, curating and envisioning this publication. I'd say it's a must-read for all, especially for those who are interested in the evolution, the priorities, the predilections of this sector, we will formally release this edition today with all of you present. So we're deeply grateful you're here. The woman in uniform is a figure of fascination for many. She evokes, or her mystique evokes, curiosity, awe, grudging admiration, some consternation, ambivalence, and from some quarters, skepticism and outright disapproval, on grounds ranging from misogyny to concerns about the efficacy of her engagement, concerns about her safety in a predominantly male space, overlaid with culturally constructed notions of physical strength, tenacity, valor, endurance, and stereotypes about what constitutes gallantry, what constitutes patriotism, and of course, binary perspectives on typically feminine and typically masculine attributes, and the need to frame terms of engagement, especially in combat roles, around a particular understanding and appreciation of difference. Of course, to this audience, I do not need to highlight the fact that both in terms of biology and socialization, we have moved beyond the binary to recognize the gender spectrum today, LGBTQI, and it has decisively entered the discourse, at least at the international level. We also recognize intersectionality. I'd request our friends to come up in front and sit. Do come, Nilova. We can't have an expert writer on defense matters sit in the back. Thank you so much. We also recognize intersectionality and how gender is mediated by class, caste, religion, and region. And also, we recognize that there are different kinds of masculinities at play. There are hegemonic masculinities, there are subordinate masculinities, and of course, there are marginal masculinities. But I don't wish to go into deep sociological analysis of this. Suffice it to say, it is not a homogeneous attribute, but broadly, masculinities can be defined in terms of behaviors, languages, and practices existing in specific cultural and organizational locations, which are commonly associated with males and thus culturally defined as non-feminine. Of course, this brings us to the inevitably big conundrum that feminist positions confront. The slippery slope that you talk about, Rita, between arguments for equality, equality of status, equality of opportunity, and equality of non-discrimination. The famous Articles 14 and 15 of the Indian Constitution, and also Article 16, which is equality in matters of public employment. We celebrate the 75th year of our Constitution this year, November 26th, to be precise, and which is why I'm bringing this in. And on the other hand, there is the consistent anti-militarist, anti-war position of the feminist movement, right from the pacifist positions taken by the iconic Women's International League for Peace and Justice and Freedom, set up in 1915. WILP was the mother of initiatives to set up to counter the scourge of war, and it laid a sort of template for women's mobilization and anti-war efforts. So it is between the Scylla and Charybdis that efforts to engender this space have to be navigated and balanced. A large part of feminist women's mobilization has also been to interrogate the structures and practices and mindsets that sustain the practice of war. So the equality argument juxtaposed with this positionality adds another layer of complexity. Emerging from this are other issues about how the nature of warfare itself is undergoing a great metamorphosis, a great transformation. The stealth weapons and the disruptive technologies like AI are introducing another depersonalized element where traditional combat involving physical strength, stamina, etc., are not necessarily at premium. So as more women tenant this space, a new grammar of combat is also taking place simultaneously. So the feminist position, if you want to call it that, must also countenance that perhaps the need for a different skill set can make this space more inviting and less intimidating for women, as General Monu Bhagat had pointed out in our discussion earlier. And perhaps it could also be more accommodating to the feminist mantra that biology is not destiny, and processes of socialization that act as inhibitors and cultural practices with women buying into them that deny women equality of opportunity and need to be countered can find greater currency, greater acceptance, and even perhaps resonance with many naysayers. But we must address the core question, it's a difficult question, of how gender parity in this space is to be negotiated when equal opportunity has to be balanced with the idea of equal suitability, what is called suitability. So what is the uniform criteria, and I don't mean the physical uniform, but what is the criteria of suitability for these positions? If we were to factor in empathetic, responsive, and collaborative attributes to soldiering, and the rights and wrongs of particular military interventions, then a whole new lexicon can be built around this notion of suitability. So this is, as I said, an extremely complex issue. We cannot also overlook the fact that security forces are increasingly being deployed to contain internal conflicts. The military that was once upon a time, deployed for international or cross-border tensions is now being pressed into service for internal security, hitherto seen primarily as the domain of the police force, which Dr. Rita Manchanda inhabits. So the line between internal and external security is now getting much thinner, especially in our region, given porous borders, given transnational crime, drug cartels, combined with political vested interests, gun running, and small arms, and the complicity of the state or state personnel. In these gray zones, how do turf issues between, say, the police and the army play out? And if the nature of the training for each wing of the security sector is distinct, how do women play effective roles in this space? Or do they get stymied in the crosshairs of chains of command and turf boundaries? There are, of course, a whole host of related issues, and it is not my place to dwell at length on them, having neither the expertise nor the experience that it requires. This distinguished panel will dilate on the more substantive issues, but a few quick concerns to flag. The first is about representation. When we are talking about women in this sector, we're also talking about representation, not just formalistic or symbolic, of women in the security sector, not just tokenism. It requires agency and it requires voice. So how much of voice stroke agency is allowed in a space that requires fairly clear, I won't say inflexible, lines of command and control, where unquestioned discipline and obedience is highly valued, where rites of passage and rituals of induction and the pressures to conform are the very basis of organizational culture? What could be the room for those who march the beat of a different drum? And they are a little out of step with those who are marching with them. Also, on representation of women in the security sector, one comes across broadly two general lines of argument that gives us some insights about the concerns at play. One that reflects what I would like to call, if with due apologies, benevolent patriarchy. That says, yes, we agree in principle with the equality argument, but till women are able to meet the requirements of a level playing field at both the recruitment as well as the promotional level, it is both unfair to them as well as to those who are not beneficiaries of affirmative action. They will just not be able to catch up, and this will affect both their morale as well as the organization in general. Some of the issues that you, Dipanjali, had flagged so many years ago. This is very much like the classist arguments that many private schools advance to preserve the status quo against the EWS quotas under the Right to Education Act. Of course, the 86th Amendment, as you know, in our Constitution, gave short shrift to this line of reasoning, questioning the very basis of how ideas of meritocracy are constructed. There is also another, perhaps a more recent and benign argument from the perspective of on-the-ground practicality and feasibility, something that General Jagatbir Singh has advanced. And it goes something like this, and is a very persuasive position. Till we have built the required infrastructure, both physical, like special facilities for rest and recreation in cantonments and areas of conflict, proper toilet facilities, proper sanitary conditions, proper nurture and nourishment and safety, proper hygienic living quarters that respect privacy, and a conducive environment that is free of misogynist practices and the propensity for harassment at the workplace, until we have trained our boys to respect dignity and bodily integrity, especially in shared spaces of the barracks, of physical proximity on the field, including very relevant concerns of if women became POWs, what would happen, and what is known as the SEA, or sexual exploitation and assault, within the organization. It might be both premature and counterproductive, the argument goes, to legislate and fast track the inclusion of women. And this is a persuasive sort of argument. While these perspectives must inform quick remedial action, they cannot, as Ambedkar said in a different context regarding caste hierarchies, be prerequisites for justice and inclusion. These initiatives will happen only when the circumstances of presence force us to take cognizance and smell the coffee. Research across countries has revealed pervasive practices that reinforce cultures of impunity and cultures of silence within organizations. And also the horrific violence which was unleashed by male peacemakers, as we know, in theaters of conflict like Rwanda and Czechoslovakia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the finding of the war crimes tribunals that we spoke about this evening. So, in a space where patriotism and nationalism are invoked routinely, and where sacrifice trumps the preservation of life, and certainly the life of the self, how would women who are socialized into roles of nurturing and valuing life navigate the compulsions of being one of the boys? What do boots on the ground entail for women? How do they negotiate the barracks, both symbolically, mentally, emotionally? Are these processes different from those of men? And contra their socialization processes, what about the trauma of SEA from within the organization? I spoke of the tropes of sacrifice and patriotism, especially reinforced by colonial or post-colonial state apparatuses. We need to think through the many dimensions of the singular allegiance and the many forms it can take when you collapse the idea of the state with that of a particular government. Say like the Delhi government or the Maharashtra government or the Assam government, for instance. So Sarfaroshi ki tamanna belonged to a different sensibility. It was an anti-colonial struggle for freedom and democracy. But now we have to look at what it is that we build our allegiance for. A long time ago, the famous political scientist Harold Lasky had written very evocatively on nationalism and civilization. And he had talked about the role of the intelligent patriot or the discerning citizen. And today we have examples of Ukraine and Israel and Palestine before us to know what the valorization of war and the cultures of militarism can do. Which is why very often erstwhile members of the armed forces themselves, like stalwarts like General Dipankar Banerjee, who's with us here today, have themselves been the greatest critics of war and the greatest builders of peace, many of them. I cannot but recall what a well-known author had said post 9/11 in 2001. And it's interesting, it's her perspective, and I think many here share that. People seldom win wars, governments seldom lose them. They emerge hydra headed, and they use flags to shrink wrap people's minds and then as ceremonial shrouds to bury their willing dead. End quote. Love of country trumps everything else under these circumstances. And so it's also important, since I talked about the 75th year of our Constitution, it's important for us to recall that Article 51A of our Constitution talks about fundamental duties. Of course, it came about at not a very happy time in our constitutional history. It came up during the emergency, as many of you know. However, among the duties that are listed, respect for the flag, respect for the anthem, upholding the unity, sovereignty, and integrity of India, defending the country, rendering national service when called upon are all listed higher. But, it also enjoins promoting harmony and brotherhood among all Indians and fraternity. So when we are deployed in so-called areas of communal conflict, do we need to think through what a command and control organization needs to mull over? And equally, we also need to renounce, according to the fundamental duties laid out in the Constitution, practices that demean women. Both the fifth and the sixth duty calls us to renounce practices that demean women. Now, I don't know, many of you were probably not born at this time, but as we were growing up, we were all taught this poem almost by heart. It was by Lord Tennyson, and it was called The Charge of the Light Brigade. I don't know how many of you in this room are familiar with it, but it was written about, you probably know about it, Dipankar. So it was about the humble British soldier marching or riding to war unquestioningly, whilst their superiors had miscommunicated key orders and tactical doctrines of that time was being ignored. This was the disastrous Battle of Balaclava. And during the Crimean War. Crimean War, that's right. And it went something like this. I can only quote some bits of it. Cannon in front of them, cannon to the right of them, cannon behind them, and into the valley of death rode the 600. Theirs was not to reason why, theirs was but to do and die. I'm just leaving that there. So decisions have consequences, as we know from our own country's experience of the India-China debacle, or even over the 200 pilot lives lost over the MiG-21 malfunctions, and from 63 onwards. I won't speak about Rafale and so on. So what mechanisms exist to examine the complex equations of decision-making throughout our history on the use of combat weapons? But that's not my area. I'm merely a layperson, a novice in the field. Coming back to the role of women, they are among the living brave hearts. Why does one have to die or perish in battle before being labeled a brave heart? So that's an unfortunate lexical problem I think we need to deal with. So their work as the first all-women peacekeeping force in Liberia, preceded by the 11 women that you had, General Bhagat, had in Somalia, which we were not very aware of, and thank you for sharing that with us, in Liberia in 2007. Subsequent engagements in DRC have been lauded the world over. The stellar role of women like Miran Chadda in the police force in quelling internal conflagration, dealing with the mafia, and above all, violence against women, and protecting internal security have often been invisibilized. There are, of course, multiple challenges of quid pro quo harassment of the workplace, safeguarding inadequacies, hostile working environment, and latent and unspoken resistance from male colleagues to women assuming leadership roles. But also importantly, the contradictions of pride on the one hand of these women and their families, and the resentment on the other from family expectations and pressure to balance the role of homemaker, caregiver, the ideal mother, and the wife, alongside delivering on the expectation of exacting time schedules and unexpected emergencies and rigors of the workplace. So professional aspirations sometimes get into the back burner. So there are many, many examples, and you know that Major Radhika Singh, as the UN Military Gender Advocate of the Year, was awarded primarily for, for deploying her battalion in the DRC to ensure that her troops actively engaged with conflict-affected communities, including women and girls, and her work involved incorporating care and compassion. So I'm getting a signal from my colleague that I must stop rambling. When we started our work on gender, peace, and security, the space of international politics, security, and diplomacy was a zone of diffidence for women in South Asia. It was an untenanted space. But 25 years later, the world has changed, and women are in the vanguard of some of the most important initiatives to foreground human security and establish the link between security, development, gender, and peace. We were then told that women have to educate themselves better on the strike capacity of missiles and learn techno-strategic discourse, a language. Women did it, and they did it with gusto and reworked several frames of reference. Our chair here is one among those. So I talked about the conundrum. I shall not go back to it again, and there's much more I did want to say, but as usual, I'm running out of time. About the police force, of course, and about getting into the armed forces, women in combat position, the Babita Punia case, 18 years before the Supreme Court actually finally ruled in favor of equality of women to enter this space, 18 long years. So it was actually like storming the Bastille for 18 years consistently. And there have been women who've been trailblazers. Kiran Bedi entered in 1972, if I'm not mistaken, Miran. And she did too, herself in the early 80s. 81. And so I think need to be celebrated. And I just discovered that one of the first women to enter a formal state army was from the state of Kerala in 1933. A woman who was allowed into the Travancore Royal Army. Of course, there have been several instances. There's been the Rani of Jhansi regiment of the Azad Hind Fauj, but those were actually groups for, shall I say, national self-realization or militant seen outside the pale of the formal state apparatus. There were many of them, the Palestine Liberation Organization, so many of them, Shahid-e-Keys and so on and so forth. So the question, however, to come to the end of this long peroration is, yes, women will engage. It's now past the time when we have to ask whether they should or they will. But how will they engage is the question. What are they going to bring? What values will they bring into this regimented space? Will they helm the newer opportunity areas that new technologies offer? Will they be in a position to change the terms of discourse on the role of the armed forces and police force in a democracy? Rita Manchanda writes about this a great deal, about the rights of citizens. And will they bestir the voice of ethically engaged reason to bear on decision-making? Will the language of rights of citizens permeate the tendency to see all disturbances as a law and order problem or a national security lens? Will the language of state power itself be humanized? We have here a gentleman who's been in the courts for a long time fighting for the rights of the individuals. And I'm very happy to welcome you here, sir. Already the recrudescence of the black clouds of war are permeating our consciousness, and the warrior discourse has created new battlefields of minds. The ascent is steep and formidable, but not impossible. But will and effort, tempered with hope and caution, will surely make despair unconvincing and hope practical. You know, when Robert Oppenheimer was asked after the bomb, and he had realized the very, very many deleterious impacts of what he had created, had he created a Frankenstein, he was asked, what is the weapon that will counter your weapon of mass destruction. He used one word and he said peace. So I rested there. But before that, I would like to introduce our, shall I say, amazing panel. And I'm sorry I've gone a little over time. Our shall I say, curator, facilitator, expert, moderator, chair is Dr. Rita Manchanda. She's a writer, researcher specializing on women, peace and security. Currently a consultant with WISCOM and a curator of this panel. She has over 15 years of experience as senior executive and research director with the regional NGO South Asian Forum for Human Rights. She has served as gender advisor to the Commonwealth Technical Fund and consulted with UN Women. She has several publications to her credit: human rights audits of peace processes, Women and the Politics of Peace, Women in the Naga Peace Process, Women, War and Peace in South Asia, Beyond Victimhood and Agency. And she writes extensively on issues of demilitarization and South Asian women's perspectives on security and peace. Very, very delighted that you could be here to do this work. And she's also the editor, as I mentioned earlier, the editor, expert editor of this particular issue of Peace Prints called Rearmed Women. We also have the privilege of the presence of Major General Jagatbir Singh. He's a distinguished fellow at the United Services Institute in India. He was commissioned into the 18th Cavalry of the Indian Army in December 1981, about the same time that Miran joined the police force. During his 38 years of service in the Army, he held command, staff, and instructional appointments and served as a military observer in the UN peacekeeping missions in Iraq and Kuwait between the two Gulf Wars, when so many Indians walked across, and you probably helped many of them. He has a BM of a mountain. He has been the BM of a mountain brigade and instructor at the Indian Military Academy and at the Staff College in Wellington. He has commanded the Armored Regiment and Armored Brigade as part of the Desert Corps, where he was responsible for the conversion of the brigade to Arjun tanks and the prestigious 1st Armored Division as part of the Strike Corps. He has spoken at several public forums and is a prolific writer on matters of defense, especially in newspapers and magazines. And we have Air Marshal Rajesh Kumar, much decorated, is a former Commander-in-Chief Strategic Forces Command in the Indian Air Force. He was commissioned into the Air Force as a fighter pilot in 1982. Did you fly the Maruts aircraft as well? No. Okay. Some of Air Marshal's appointments includes Director Operations at the Air Headquarters in Delhi, Team Leader of the Project Monitoring Team, Team for Airborne Early Warning and Control Systems in Israel, and Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief in Central Air Command, Allahabad, among others. Air Marshal Kumar is an alumnus of Mayo College and the NDA, Khadakwasla. He's graduate of the Air Command and Staff College at Montgomery, Alabama, where, of course, you know, the famous Civil Rights March happened with Martin Luther King. He also has undergone the Higher Defense Management course. Currently, he also works with several Track 2 initiatives on issues of nuclear disarmament. And from all the reports that I have got, he has really brought electricity into the room where he has engaged with people across borders and boundaries. And Dr. Miran Chatta-Bovankar, it's such a pleasure to have you here. A 1981 batch officer of the Indian Police Service. Many of you, I'm sure many of you have read her pieces, how she has spoken out for human rights, her civil liberties, especially in the context of police citizen interaction interface, overweening, shall I say, power of states across the length and breadth of the country and outside. She's currently a member of the core advisory group on the criminal justice system, probably the most valued public intellectual on police reforms, along with Majha Daruwala. She was Director General, Bureau of Police Research and Development at the National Crime Records Bureau, and during her illustrious career, she was Chief of Maharashtra Prisons, not an easy job, a Commissioner of Police Pune, and DIG, CBI, EOW, and anti-corruption. And to be in Mumbai and deal with anti-corruption is very tough. And she's Chief of Crime Branch, she was in Mumbai. She has been a Hubert Humphrey Fellow at the University of Minnesota in USA. She's also completed executive development programs from the University of New England, Australia. She has received several awards for her distinguished service, and she's on various academic boards and has authored 3 books, Leaves of Life, Inspector Chogule, and Madame Commissioner. I think I should call you Madam Sir, as most of these people do, Madam Sirs. She writes fearlessly and inclusively. We also have as discussants Dr. Smriti Patnaik, who's a research fellow at the IDSA, and she's a South Asian specialist currently engaged in a research project focusing on the phenomenon of political Islam, Islamic militancy, and the state in comparative perspective. We have, of course, our very own Professor Anuradha Chinoy, currently adjunct professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs at the Jindal Global University. She was Dean at the School of International Studies, JNU, and she has been chairperson and director of the Area Studies Program for Russia, Central Asia. She has written several books. I mean, if I start listing them, it will take the better part of the evening. She's also worked with the International Committee of the Red Cross, with UNESCO, ActionAid, and UN Women. She's committed. She's a peace activist. She's a scholar, and above all, she's been a very, very steadfast friend of ISKCON. And last but not least, Major General Mano Bhagat, sir, we're delighted and privileged to have you here, a seasoned UN peacekeeper, having served in the Army for over 38 years and the UN for 14 years. He was assigned to take the Indian Brigade and contingent to Somalia way back in 1993, and then brought it back upon the closure of the UN peacekeeping mission there in 94. The Indians, according to many of the people who know, was the only success story in that particular mission operation in Somalia. And as commander on his return, he was conferred the Param Vishisht Service Medal, which is unusual, a rare honor for a brigadier. He then served at the UN headquarters as Deputy Military Advisor to the UN Secretary General for 5 years, and he was highly valued in the DPKO and is still valued. I know that from his colleagues who said that if you can get him to come, you're very lucky. And he reverted to the UN as a civil official, heading administration and integrated logistics in the UN field PK missions of Sierra Leone, which of course, as you know, is a hotbed of conflict, and of course the DRC. So he is here now, having superannuated from the UN. I'm also particularly delighted to welcome our director of the IIC, who has extended the collaboration of the IIC for this particular function. Mr. Srivastava, it's great to have you here. And also Dr. Usha Munshi, who oils the, shall I say, the intellectual machinery of this very, very special place called the India International Center. Before we request the panel to make their presentations, may we do the honor of, will you do us the honor of releasing this particular edition of Peace Prints? May I request Mr. Srivastava to please come up and join the Galaxy. Yeah. I'm an interloper, but
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. I want to thank Meenakshi Gopinath for having set the form, the framework, and the tone. Some of the questions that we will be discussing have already been raised by her. So I'm going to be extremely brief. I need to mention the kind of format. It's not going to be formal presentations. It is more in the structure of a conversation. Um, 2 rounds of conversation, 5 minutes each in the first round, and then another 5 minutes in the second round, then followed by the discussant comments and questions, and you will have a chance for a couple of minutes to respond if you wish to the discussants if they're raising specific questions. And then, of course, it's open forum. But before I request the first, begin the conversation, let me just say that I need to confess I am far more comfortable in the feminist peace camp. And that for somebody like me, and in fact for several people sitting here, for us to turn our gaze onto the military and women in the military is not an easy task because many of us have been extremely uncomfortable about the whole idea of women's induction in the military and the promotion of greater militarism, the militarization of, in fact, the women peace and security agenda in the programmatic framework of the UN as well. So it really required some amount of reflection for many of us to turn to this subject, and it was because of the material reality that confronted us. Women are joining the military. There are not hundreds, there are not 1,000, but there are thousands of women who are joining. And I'm talking about India. Across the globe, they have this process began even before. But you find that even across the globe, there has been a problem. I mean, I was looking at a report in 2021 that came out in a journal called The Conversation. They're looking at the UK military. This was based on a committee report submitted to the UK Parliament. And they said women in the UK military have had to face, right throughout their career, hostile response, that their body armor doesn't fit, that menstrual products don't reach them in time, that they face sexual harassment and assault, and that they are discriminated against. And this is the UK military. So I do want to celebrate the fact that there is this expansion of the presence of women in our armed forces. And here, when I talk about the armed forces, I am not only talking about the Army, Air Force, and the Navy, but I'm also including the Central Armed Police Forces and a much, in fact, wider framework of uniformed women. Meenakshi has already mentioned the repurposing of our armies in terms of the kind of duties, the kind of roles that they are expected to play in a much more complex security environment that includes human security as well as military security. There is also the whole issue of technological shifts that are in fact making perhaps irrelevant the whole fetishization of physical prowess, so that there are a lot of questions about what is the archetypal soldier, what is in fact combat in today's armies. And maybe I think I need to flag that there are today women squadron leaders, there are lieutenant general women in the army, there are women steering warships.
there is a huge opening up, particularly after the opening up of permanent commission. But are we really seeing a social, or we are on the brink of a social revolution? Have we really been able to transcend gender stereotypes and prejudices? And here, I mean, we were still talking about intruders in a masculine bastion, still talking about women as unnecessary encumbrances, still talking about women as, in fact, there's this wonderful interview of General Panang in which he says, well, when the women first joined as an experiment, we thought they'll soon go away. Let's not take them seriously. So different standards for recruitment, nobody took them seriously. But yes, you had benevolent patriarchy. They were pampered. You had in defense ministry statement made to a parliamentary committee in 2011, they were called tenanting sheltered appointments, meaning they were only posted to areas which were low risk, which were non-threatening. Okay, administrative posts behind a desk, interpreters, managing computers, and so forth. No, they were not taken seriously. They were marginalized. And Deepanjali Bakshi is here, whose work, a 2005 monograph, is really something I think anybody interested in this topic should read. So, have we really overcome this? Every time I think that all these changes are happening, yet if you look at the literature, a lot of literature written by serving officers, retired of the forces across the board, you suddenly find they're talking about uneasiness over the ad hocism of the way that women are being recruited. They're saying, why are we being unwillingly or willingly being pushed to induct women when we are not ready? And, many of these people believe in gender equality. They're all for it. But they're also trying to balance the whole issue of equal opportunity and suitability, equal opportunity and operational requirements. So before I would still like to come back to the whole issue of, have we really transcended gender stereotypes? Are we still caught in the conundrum of, oh dear, our soldiers might be taken as POWs, prisoners, as POWs? Or are we still talking about casualties in MiG crashes or so forth? I mean, have we actually really moved forward? Is there really the possibility of gender parity? And what about the concern about promotion of greater militarization? So I am going to first request General Jagatbir Singh. As I said, this is a conversation. We may not be structured in a very conversational manner, but please indulge me. So I'd like to ask you, have we actually transcended some of these gender stereotypes? Or are we, this whole concern about, in the framework of gender integration, of balancing equal opportunity and operational effectiveness, is that really a camouflage for really expressing gender prejudice and once again gender stereotypes rooted in pretty outdated notions if we are talking about a new military, a new type of soldier, new combat? Yes.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor and a rare privilege for me to be here to discuss a very important, contemporary, and complex subject, which has always been at the forefront as far as the media is concerned, and with all of you today. And at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath for, the wonderful remarks that you made. And I mean, it's really, you covered almost everything in your initial talk. So very little for us to say. So I must thank you. And I'd also like to particularly thank Rita Manchanda for, guiding me through literally this article I wrote for the magazine Peace Prince, which has come out today, and it's only because of her, pushing me that I was finally able to complete it and sitting here today to share my thoughts with you. And indeed, I'm grateful, that such a eminent lot of people are here to listen to our views on this subject. General Bhagat is here, General Dipankar Banerjee, and all of you are here today. And I will be speaking to you not from a point of view of an academician, not from a point of view of a researcher. I'll be speaking to you based on my views, which have been shaped over my experience of 30 plus years in the services wearing the uniform, and more focused from the, type of, beret I wore, the color of the beret I wore. So, which is, that's the difference, So everybody looks at, the role of women in the army in one particular manner and how it does. But the way you look at the role of women and the way those in service look at the role of women, the tasks and responsibilities of the army, I mean, there are variances and there are differences. So, as I said, my views today will be entirely based on my experience. And it's not easy for me to, I'll say that for all of this, us in uniform, to address such a distinguished audience of academicians and researchers, because we speak from, a totally different background. And that is of those who have, at the, you can say, the practitioners level and not the other level. So, I mean, there's something. And every one of you sitting here has very convincing views in your mind of, how this should be undertaken and what should be done and how it should open up. But the army and the services are, you can say women are in the army, but where in the army, how they serve, what they do, there's a wide variance. So I've heard, a lot of arguments that women have been in Siachen, women have been there. But I asked people, I said, yes, they've been in Siachen. But where in Siachen, to what degree? I mean, there's a loose statement. I mean, not a loose statement, people, it's a fact. He said, I've served in J&K. So I said, there's a difference between serving in J&K, in a corps headquarter, difference when you serve in a brigade headquarter, and different when you serve in a battalion, which is on the LOC. So, I mean, there's difference between the three. So how exactly can you say that, yes, you all served in J&K, but where exactly have you served? In what manner have you served? What is the appointment you've held? It makes a difference. So, I mean, that's the fact. So, to start with, I must categorically state, and I don't deny that women have been, are, and will continue to be in the army over the years, and their role and their responsibilities are constantly expanding. And this expansion is taking place mainly because, and I don't hesitate to say that, because of their performance. Their performance, whichever task they've been assigned to, has not been found wanting in any way. So constantly you see more and more areas which have been opened up for women in the armed forces. And they are shouldering greater responsibilities. Earlier, there were impediments in the form of policies against women, and that has been brought out. So women serve for shorter times. They never got permanent commissions. They would never got, pensions. Now things have changed. They've got greater large number of doors have opened up. Last year was the first time when 6 women officers attended the Defense Services Staff College. This year, of course, they're less, but last year was the first time 6 women, and that's an open exam. So it's nothing that they have been given vacancies to do that. So it's an open exam. I think about 2 years ago, commands also opened up for women officers based on the board, based on directives from courts. So, so policies have also changed because women have taken up these, where they felt discriminated against and gone to court, and the courts have given some directions, and based on that, the army has implemented those directions. So the latest arm to have been opened up for the women in the army was artillery. So large number of women got commissioned into the artillery. But this is policy discriminations have been there, but I've said that gradually these have been done away with. But often people ask me that, will you see a lady officer as the chief, or will you see her in command of a division? For that, you have to understand the structure of the army to a greater degree. And the first thing is that the people who rise to those levels are part of what they call the generals cadre, the general staff. I mean, they are mainly people from the infantry, armored corps, mechanized infantry. They constitute this. And the people who get into that are from engineers, artillery, air defense, who have performed well over their careers based on their cost profile, based on the appointments held, based on the their reports, and they have been recommended for general cadre and come. So we've had many chiefs who are from artillery. We've had the last chief was from engineers. So I'm not saying it's not there. So if women are in engineers, women are in artillery, yes, they can qualify to go up, provided they pass all the other steps in place. So one of the steps is to pass staff college. Last year 6 got through. So I mean, it'll gradually improve. As far as interaction with lady officers is concerned, wherever you meet any of them or whoever you interact with, it's always very, very positive. Last year, I had the opportunity to go to Welham Boys School as part of a military history seminar, and I came across young girls who are from RIMC. Now, RIMC, if for those, is the oldest. You can say it was the first school which was opened up for India. It was part of the Indianization process. So, and it's contributed a lot as far as Indian military leadership is concerned in all 3 services. We've had many chiefs from there, in fact. So, I mean, they are there and they're doing well. So, when I asked them, I said, how do you like, I mean, you can't, if you see them, they're all with short hairs, wearing berets and all that, same uniform, but they were full of, josh. And they said, bulk of them said, we want to be fighter pilots. I met 12. 11 said we wanted to be fighter pilots. 1 said, I want to join the infantry. I said, that's wonderful. But as the infantry opened up, no. She says, but look at her confidence. She said, sir, I'll go to NDA. After that, probably it'll open up. So that's the thing. I met the commandant once of OTA, and he told me, OTA is Officers Training Academy, ma'am, it's in Chennai. That's where the women officers are trained. So this gentleman was, General Jog was his name, and he was the commandant, and he had come to Wellington to speak over there. And he said the women officers, women cadets are performing exceedingly well, be it firing, be it, other things. So he said that I've done very well. I've got no hesitation. In fact, some women officers have even won the Sword of Honor over there. So, I mean, that's a fact. As staff college, I told you about. But, when you look at it, each one is different. Lately, you must have seen the floods took place in Wayanad. And there was a picture which came out in a lot of newspapers. And that was of a bridge which was constructed over that river. And that was constructed in record time. And the leader of that was a young major who happened to be from Madras Engineers, which was from where this team had come, from Bangalore. And that was it. So, I mean, they did it. They've done it. So, I mean, they were in all fields. They are there. So, I'm not saying that women are not there. Women are doing their job, and women are doing their job, I'll say, better than men. And in this, I'd like to say that you can't distinguish in gender. Even amongst the men, there are people who do a brilliant job. There are people who are not so good, and there are people who are poor. I mean, everybody doesn't, you see, you have standards for, say, running. And the highest thing you're meant to be is excellent. Every man doesn't come in excellent. There's some satisfactory and some fail. Same way with women, they have their own standards. So, and whatever task is done, they're given it out. So, in my paper, which I've written, which has come out in the journal, I've actually grappled with this thing that one side, women, whatever task they've been given, they are performing that task to the entire satisfaction of their superior. And at the other side is, are we ready to open up more vistas for the women within these services? And what are the challenges? And every time I've been told, that war is changing. Times of conflict are changing. So if these have changed, are women ready to fit into the changing roles which are likely to come about? So this argument of war changing is right at the forefront now. And everyone says technology is driving the change. and you see pictures of drones and so on, and precision weapons and communications and satellites, and they say cyber warfare. Yes, the domains have increased to a large extent, and but a lot of myths about warfare and all are still exist. I mean, people said, there's a person called Rupert Smith. He wrote a book, Utility of War. He said wars no longer exist. And what have we seen? Wars are still there. And this he wrote after his experience in Kosovo, when he was leading the British troops there. People said the wars will be small. What are we seeing? Short, small. Wars are continuing. Israel over here, Ukraine even longer.
Maybe
Yeah,
the second
yeah,
time round.
yeah. I'll just 2 minutes. I'll just wrap up. Economist showed a picture on the cover where they had drones and surveillance weapons and everything, but yet they had troops on ground. So that is the reality, is that you have both sides which are still existing. So as Clausewitz says, the nature of war, violence still remains, but the character of war is changing. So in these new domains, if you see land, air and sea were the earlier domains. Now you talk of cyber, you talk of information warfare, you talk of space. In these domains, yes, there is space for women. There is no denying that. And even within the existing domain, there are various places where women can serve and will serve. But to what extent can they serve in the, infantry, armored corps, mechanized infantry, special forces? That is
I'll
the
come back.
question. Yeah,
I'll come back to that,
absolutely.
huh? Okay, let me just pick up on something that you said, which was they're doing their job well. The question to be asked is what kind of role the lieutenant general or the air marshal woman is serving. The air marshal woman is serving in the role of a DG medical services. The woman in Siachen, I don't remember now her rank, she is in the medical corps. She's in the medical services. So it's also the reason that I'm emphasizing this, leading up to the question that I would like to pose to Air Marshal Rajesh Kumar, is are we still seeing gendered roles of what women can do, should do, or are they actually doing all kinds of roles if they choose to do them, and if they are considered if they're considered physically, mentally, emotionally able to do those roles. The Air Force has been amongst the forces which has taken the lead in terms of the induction of women. You did not challenge the High Court judgment. In fact, in 2010 itself, you went forward to grant permanent commission, I think 2010. And you've had, as I mentioned, women who have been squadron leaders, they're flying combat aircraft. But are we still really seeing that the areas that they're posted to are non-dangerous? They are, in areas which are considered gentle areas, safe areas, or the ones who do succeed, do they succeed because they're more like men?
Thank you, WISCOMP and Foundation of the Universal Responsibility of His Holiness of Dalai Lama to, express my views, and thank you for those wonderful questions. I'd like to reiterate once again that I'm not an academic, so academics tend to approach the subject in a very normative kind of a manner. When I read the concept note, I was really wondering about whether I should be talking about empathy or equal opportunity. So I was for shortage of time, and I can debate this subject at length. The fact is, human beings, war is in the nature of a human being, and that has been seen throughout our history. Right from the Stone Age, we've been having wars. Wars have lasted hundreds of years. There is a belief, and many contest that when Ashoka gave up the army, we entered an era of 1,000 years of slavery. Whatever. But the fact is that war is in the nature of humans. And much as I would love to sue for peace, the reality is different. I am part of very many discussions on disarmament, and I am a very vocal advocate of disarmament, having been the Chief of Strategic Forces Command. But the fact is that despite us knowing that disarmament is not going to take us anywhere, the dialogue is practically dead in the World Forum. But the fact is that you still got to keep pushing. So while I understand that we all want to sue for peace, the reality today and in our lifetimes is going to be that the nature of war is going to be continuously evolving, and that women will have a role in the armed forces. Now, what is an archetypical soldier? There is no archetypical soldier. The spectrum of war has expanded dramatically. It is from hand-to-hand combat to nuclear war. And if you see in that, you add the various dimensions of war, of information, of cyber, of other technologies, it is continuously expanding. The spectrum of war is not reducing. It's something like your count to infinity. It's really strange that we are not able to limit the spectrum of war. And so in this huge spectrum, there are going to be different types of soldiers. There are going to be soldier warriors. There are going to be scholar soldiers. There are going to be keyboard soldiers. And they're going to be, soldiers who are leaders and who make the planners. So, and who will orchestrate this whole thing. So therefore, the definition of soldier will continue to expand, and therefore we should not give in to any kind of gender stereotypes. Though they are there, okay, but when we look at gender stereotypes, it's not only limited to women, it's also men. So when we say, do women need to be like men? Masculine? What are we referring to? Is being aggressive masculine? Aggressiveness is required of a warrior. So if you're a warrior, whether you are man or woman, you need to be aggressive because that is the nature of war. So is it masculine? Probably not. What about leadership? Is it a masculine trait? It is very much a trait for every gender. And leadership doesn't come in the armed forces by rank or by hierarchy, contrary to what many people think. In actual war, if you are not a leader, your men will just leave you behind. You will not find any resonance in the plan that you make or you want to execute if you don't have the qualities of leadership where the men and women under you willingly follow you. You talked about do or die. Eventually, they have to be willing to do that. Many of those 600 could have turned around and there was nobody to stop them. But the fact is that we should not look at qualities of warriors through a gendered lens. We should look at the qualities of a warrior from the qualities of teamwork and leadership. Because in any task in today's war, it all depends on the team. And you fit into the team. The leader of the team may not be the strongest, most physically fit. He may not be the most brainiest, but he brings those qualities where he is able to make the strongest, the brainiest, and the weakest follow him in a task that eventually leads to victory. Because there are no prizes for runners-up. And that is the lens at which we should look at. Today, we think that could be a issue of if we have gender parity, we will lose operational effectiveness. I will disagree there, and I will say that op effectiveness depends on the plan and the right people. You select the right people irrespective of gender. And who can do that? That's the leader. Now, I am going to focus more on what is in the IAF, and much of the history has been gone through. But just to repeat a couple of those things, I went through A. Marshall Khosla's article, and I pretty much agree with what he says. He was my boss, so I have no choice but not to agree. But the fact is that induction has been a slow process. It has been court driven, but it's been there. It's not just it's not just the Indian military. Even the US military, the UK military was slow to change. Large number of times. Combat role was given in 1989. 1994 was the first time when the first fighter pilot, 5 years before they were permitted. USAF started combat roles in 1976, but didn't have the first fighter pilot till 1993, and so on and so forth. So I was really wondering, why is it that the same story is repeated in all the armed forces? It's not just this thing. Just remember, in World War II, 200,000 women of the Royal Air Force were 200,000 people of the Royal Air Force were women at the time of demobilization. All the Wrens were, in large numbers. All the people who were in the radar stations, who moved those little models, they were all women. So they served with honor, with distinction. But why is it that the armed forces have taken so much time to change pretty much all the world over? It's because everything in the armed forces is evolutionary. There's nothing that is revolutionary. Do you heard of the term revolution in military affairs? Believe you me, for all the serving officers will agree with me, it's an oxymoron. Revolution does take place in the way combat happens, but it evolves over a period of time till the training, tactics, and procedures catch up to that revolution. So I think we should give it time. The courts have speeded up the process of change, but the courts have also accepted the armed forces' point of view of effectiveness, suitability, etc., etc. So it's not just that one this thing. And when it comes to op effectiveness, I can tell you, having been the senior air command staff officer and the CNC, invariably you have to travel a lot, and invariably you travel in one of the military aircraft. And when there are pilots who are VIP qualified to say they are the better lot, they take you around, and many times they have been women. So the women who are selected to ferry the CNC, etc., are from people whose commanding officers have trust in. So there is no what should I say? There's no infirmity on that account. Women are doing well in the Air Force. And like the general said, there are exceptional, satisfactory, poor. It applies to all the genders. And as far as sexual assault and exploitation is concerned, zero tolerance policy is there at the moment, and it's applied across the board. What has changed over a period of time was that when the initial lot of women were there, if a woman just made a verbal complaint, it was taken as gospel. And, the entire inquiry and the actions were against that. Today, we are having a proper structured investigation and a proper outcome. Unfortunately, that is upsetting a few people because they want on verbal complaints actions to be taken. That is not going to happen. You have to give everybody an equal chance to defend themselves. Work-life balance is an issue. This is something that perhaps in the next round I'll develop a little more on, but it's an issue, and it's a bigger issue for women than men. I'll concede that. It's a problem. But what motivates young women in the military? I can expand on that, having spoken at length to people, but I'm kind of running out of time. But my point is that despite having granted, I'll leave you with this thought, despite having granted permanent commission to women who were initially joined in short service commission, our best women are leaving us for the corporate sector. Okay, so that's the reality. And we have to live with it. We have to understand it. These are the social changes that are taking place. And that's where we look at what is the motivation. Armed forces at its core, in India at least, remains a voluntary service. You have to volunteer, you have to sign up. And that's the pool that we look at.
Thank you, sir. Miran, may I? Now you come from the police service, and while the Central Armed Police Forces are different, however, as in fact was said earlier, there's been a lot of blurring of lines in terms of the management of internal security. Some of the concerns about gender integration, which I think are relevant for the police forces as well as for the Central Armed Police Forces. The issue of gender stereotypes, the issue of sheltered appointments, the issue of, as far as the CAPF is concerned, are women being sent to the Maoist areas? Of course, they may be sent to the areas, but are they serving in fact, equal opportunity postings as the men who are deployed in that area? Is there still a gender differentiated role for women, even in the police? I mean, how many women are posted to dangerous areas, dangerous assignments? Have we actually been able to transcend this? And is there something you can share which would reflect on how difficult some of these challenges are to overcome from your own experience and extrapolating it through the CAPF?
Thank you, Rita, and thanks for inviting me. Since Meenakshi ma'am has given the academic background and General Singh and Kumar sir have covered the army part, I have not worked in CAPFs, but my experience in police I think will help. So I belong to 1981 batch of Indian Police Service, and in a batch of 70, I was the only lady. And in 81, it's the only lady. And in 2024, about 25% probationers undergoing training in National Police Academy, Hyderabad are women. So you can see from 81-1 and 2024, about 25% women. Now, I would like to give my own journey and share it to show how we have changed. First time, when I was due for an independent district as superintendent of police, in 91, my file was returned twice by the chief minister. Not that he said no. He said, she's a DCP in Mumbai, she's doing very well. If we send her to the district, when she is in Mumbai, we are here to help her in case there is a difficulty. Who will help her if she goes to a district? So that patronizing environment, I think, has changed. Now this file returned twice, and 20 years later, when I was nominated to head the crime branch Mumbai, I was asked if I am ready. And you know what crime branch Mumbai is like. It deals only with gangs and organized crime. After I accepted the offer, it took 3 months for the government to issue the order. And when I checked, I was told that the Deputy CM, who was also the Home Minister, is consulting other officers. How will a lady officer deal with the encounters? So 81, only lady. 1991, they male leadership, not with any bad intentions, but that patriarchal feeling that they wanted to protect me when I said, I don't need your protection. And then 2004, but India has changed so much. No eyebrows were raised when I was posted Commissioner of Police Pune. So, sir, you are right that women are negotiating. I also negotiated my way through. And today, India has 12% women in civil police. We want them to be 33% because of the various qualities, special skills which women have and they bring to the desk, to the job. As for CAPFs, we still have only 4% of women. I talked to various male, female officers, and they are unanimous that though women are seeking better infrastructure, toilets, restrooms, more equipment adapting to their physical shapes, their performance in nowhere is secondary to the male officers. What you have said. And like there are good, bad, and excellent officers. Now, I want to give one thought. I want to share it. That we are making so much noise about AI, artificial intelligence. Have we ever thought of WI, women intelligence? Men have not explored it, but they captured the stage. They didn't allow us to come out with the solutions which we can. Solutions were being imposed upon us. Just like limits were being imposed on us, you are not fit for army, you are not fit for police, you are not fit for leadership roles. If you are fit, okay, this is the way out, this is the way out, this is the way out. I am saying if the world is giving so much space to AI, please allow WI to come out with its full potentials. And I rest my case. Thank you.
Very well.
Thank you very much. You've also given me the opening to hook into two things that the Air Marshal and the General spoke about, which is the whole issue of empathy, compassion, qualities, values that are associated with women, and aggression, as you said, is something that is part of the warrior culture. It will have, if there's anyone, if in fact you are taking on those kind of roles, you would need to have those qualities. But I am asking whether the presence of women, the involvement of women, particularly the involvement of women within a framework of gender integration, has actually seen some regendering of the very masculine, militarized masculinity landscape of the armed forces. I think, and I don't know that much about the Indian Army, but having looked at training manuals of the US Army, I am aware of the kind of warrior culture, macho masculinity that is actually pushed in their training manuals. But is there, given the expansion of the presence of women, is there something that has been learned from women's way of doing things, something about accepting that emotion is a value that is to be valued and respected? Otherwise, frankly, the whole deployment of women in peacekeeping as female engagement teams is to provide emotional labor. Protection is provided by the male peacekeepers, and the women are expected in these female engagement teams to provide emotional labor. But I'm asking, is there a possibility of these binaries, these hierarchical binaries being bridged, and some kind of regendering of accepting that some of these are values which in fact even militarized masculinity should adopt? And why not women in combat?
So you raised very interesting questions, actually. Very, some things are very difficult to answer, but I'll make an attempt. And, you know, when we look at people serving under us, frankly saying, I don't look at the lady as a man or something. We look at them as soldiers, as people who are under us, people belong to a particular arm or service, who are carrying out a particular responsibility, who have to carry out a particular task. If you ask me, does the army mandate is what? The army's mandate is to defend the territorial integrity of the nation. So when the mandate is that, they have to carry it out in the best possible manner. And in the army, always the operational necessity, operational requirements overrides everything else. That is the fact of the matter. I was serving in a branch in army headquarters, which is, the branch which is not liked by most people, because everybody came to you with a problem, and the problem was extremely, from his point of view, it was paramount. But when you sit there and you look at postings, you have to see what is the organizational interest and why that person has to be posted to a particular place at a particular time, like ma'am had brought up, and compared to his own personal requirements. So, I mean, that is something which is there. So we often, I'll just give you a small aside. So I had a friend who was commanding a engineer regiment, and that person was moving from Bikaner to the northeast. They were going to part of 57 Div, which is in Manipur now. And the thing is that when they had to go, you have to send some people in advance to attend a course at a place called Warangte, which is in Mizoram, which is called the CIJW, Counterinsurgency in Jungle Warfare. So in the message, I mean, when they got this detail, it was send 2 officers. So this guy promptly sent, and so many JCO, so many men. So amongst the 2 officers, he sent 2 ladies. So that person from there rung up and said that, how can you do it? He says, your letter specified 2 officers. As far as I'm concerned, that's what I wanted to say. I've sent 2 officers. But if they don't match up to the standard, then you revert them, what they call RT, you return to the unit, and I will then send somebody else in place. They never returned the officers. Those 2 did very well. And they were then acted as the nucleus to train the rest of the unit when it got inducted in that area. So, I mean, this is there. So, you have to look at it that way. But I also, at the same time, what you're saying, empathy, way to function, what to do, every arm has its own skill sets. Every arm and service has its own skill set. So you have to, and you all work together as a team. Nobody can function in isolation. Everybody has to be together to carry out that particular task. So where the women are being employed presently today, they are carrying out the tasks which are aligned with their arm and their service, and fulfilling that to the best of their ability, capability, in line with what are the directions given of that. Now, whether they can serve in the front edge of the combat arms, like I'll tell you, I'm from Armored Corps, and we operate in tanks. Now, the tanks are a moving weapon platform, so to say, to put it simply, and it's a 3-man crew. And those 3 men, one is the driver, one is the commander, one is the gunner. You have to, physically load the ammunition. Each ammunition is about 50 to 60 kilos. It has to be loaded. There's no place to sleep. There's no place to rest. Wherever you're stopped, the tank stops, and each one is separated by 50 to 500 meters. And you're only talking on radio sets. I mean, that's it. Barrels of fuel have to be loaded. Each barrel is 200 kilos. This is one thing. So similar problems exist in infantry. Similar problems exist in, mechanized infantry. Other problems exist in special forces. So, I mean, certain needs and requirements of the women in this environment cannot be catered for presently. So how do you manage? So presently, the women are not part of the combat arms. And you look at the present conflicts which are going on. The present conflicts which are going on are in Ukraine and in Israel. Now, I'm sure I just, said, let me just read up on this. The number of women who have come into the Ukrainian armed forces in recent times has increased exponentially. Why? Because they found that there's a shortage of men. But what is the number of women who are at the front line? They are the furthest ahead are women who are being used in infantry battalions as snipers. So, I mean, You've had this clash which took place in Bakhmut and other places. What were the level of women over there? What are the level of casualties that have taken place amongst women and amongst men in Ukraine? They've said the total number Russian women soldiers killed has been 3 to 4, whereas the Ukrainian women soldiers killed is about 100. So 103 versus nearly 20,000 or something, if not more. So I mean, it's these are the comparisons. So I mean, finally, as the army is, what is the role? Is it role to ensure gender inclusivity, or is it role to ensure territorial integrity? And I'm sure that is where the crux lies of everything. I'm being very honest with you. I'll be failing if I don't say this. So, I mean, you have to take that in task. And if your task is to, capture a particular point within a specified time with less resources, with, ensure it's done in a particular manner. And whichever lady fits into that thing to carry that out, be it directing, artillery fire from somewhere, carrying out air defense from somewhere, I mean, she'll fit in and do it. Or very importantly, providing you the supplies. Medical was there earlier, but today their role is expanded. Engineers are building the bridges. They're laying that. They're right ahead in combat. So that's there.
Thank you. I think you made a fairly persuasive case, but the question that needs to be asked is the Ukrainian army gendered? I mean, evidently they are tenanting the women soldiers in more sheltered roles and the men in less sheltered roles. There's also this whole issue of this fetishization of the culture of fitness, of carrying these heavy loads. I don't know whether the new woman that is appearing in the scene is able to in fact carry these loads, and physically there may not be that much of a difference. I know that in the recruitment of Navy SEALs and so forth in the US, this has become a major challenge. But you certainly made a persuasive case. Air Marshal, may I request you to take on some of the same questions? And, you've made a very good and persuasive normative case of how gender parity should work. But how does it really work in the forces, in the Air Force? Is there real acceptance of women serving in frontline combat positions? Or are this is still an evolutionary process and it will require time?
Thank you. I'll be happy to address some of these issues. So one of the questions I think that you asked in the past was that with technology now, is physical fitness that much of an issue? So it all depends. Perhaps it is to a lesser degree in the Air Force, but maybe it's to a larger degree in the Army, and Navy somewhere in between. So, but is technology the answer to everything? I think the Israeli conflict has shown, before this Ukraine war and the Gaza crisis erupted, there were two major postulates that the Indian government or the Indian armed forces and in fact the world at general had kind of internalized. One was that wars will be short, swift and limited. And the second was that technology will replace human beings in war. I think both have been proven wrong. One by the first by the Ukraine crisis and the second by the Gaza crisis. So we must understand that the spectrum of war will continue to expand, and some of the portions of the spectrum which were there in the past will continue to remain. And therefore, will technology overcome everything so as to make it easier? Of course, yes, to some extent, but everywhere can we dot all the I's and T's and say, yes here, yes here, yes here also? Can we generalize it? And my argument is that there is no generalization. Like I said, there is no typical soldier, so there is no generalization. There are roles, missions that are there, and if you fit into that role and mission, you're there. You're absolutely there. Nobody is saying, and there is huge acceptance of, at least in the Air Force, of women in the armed forces. And in fact, one of the arguments in the past was that maybe women being inducted as officers, the men will feel, a little shy of accepting orders from women. But we never saw that in the Air Force, at least. There was nobody who turned up and said, I'm not going to take orders from a woman, or words to that effect. And it's been, the acceptance is very much there, but there is increasing, what should I say, a push or a pushback, if I say, from the armed forces to say, now that we've accepted everybody, standards must be same for everyone. So wherever there have been differing standards in some cases, people are starting to question that. So they are saying that if equal opportunity is there, then there should be equal standards as well. So that is a little bit of pushback that is coming. But otherwise, there's no real this thing. The key issue now, 33% of Israeli armed forces and reserves, in their major ones are reserves, are women. In this conflict, they have not, they have given an excellent account of themselves. In fact, if you saw this October 7 attack, of all the hostages that are still in Gaza, 100 plus of them, I think 5 or 6 of them are Israeli women soldiers. And this is my prediction. They will be the last to be released, if ever. Because they are the biggest, the most prized negotiating assets. So it still rankles, but that's the reality. And in Ukraine, you see, we talk of equal opportunity, but the fact is, when the Ukrainians passed a law that no male of the age of 18 to 60 is permitted to leave the country, they didn't have the same for women. In fact, I asked ChatGPT as to how many Ukrainian women were living outside the country. It's about 3 million. Out of a population of 44 million. So, of which 22 are women. So, that's how it is. So, 1/7 of the women population is actually living outside the country. Therefore, some of the concerns that have been, that are traditionally, accepted, they are actually playing out in front of us. And we need to overcome them. Okay, I'm sure that when you look, if those women prisoners of Hamas, or who are Israeli soldiers, women soldiers, if they are released, they will happily go back into the same combat. Though, of course, they were not in combat when they were kidnapped, but the fact is they will happily go back, because when I speak, there are 54 women who are being inducted for the first time as airmen in the first batch in the Air Force. And the previous Chief of Air Staff, I was speaking to him, and he actually went and spoke to them, and he asked them which role would you like to play? And they said, we all want to be Garuds, Special Forces. Okay, now it's a great desire, but you know what the chief had to tell them? He said, listen, our core task is to maintain aircraft for the airmen. That is our bread and butter job. How many of you want to do that? Surprisingly, none. So it's very strange. Very strange. You want to be at the forefront, but there is a core job to be done. That must motivate you. So what motivates women? How do they come up, and so on and so forth? It's a mixture. And believe you me, all these little things that are, nits and picks and say we can't do this and we can't do that, 90% of them are HR problems. I had a case when I was a SASO. I assigned a task to one of the units, and after about 2 hours, the airbase commander came back to me and he said, "Sir, you've given my commanding officer this task, but unfortunately he can't do it." So I said, "What's the problem?" He says he doesn't have pilots. He says, "What is the problem?" He says, "Sir, 4 of his women pilots are on maternity leave." Okay. Now, so no. Let me finish the story. I think let's not take the wrong lessons here. Okay. But I said that, I wish he had told me earlier. We would have got him 2 more guys posted in. What's the problem? I mean, so it's an HR issue. It's not an operational issue. It became an operational issue because somebody ignored an HR issue.
Fair enough. So you will have to close right
Okay, so I will just take one more second, and I want to talk about work-life balance. I think it's easier for men to adapt to the work-life balance of the very, very demanding requirements of the armed forces. And women who sometimes are expected to play the traditional role get the short end of the stick on this subject. And that's why, like I told you, we are losing our best women to the corporate sector because they're simply not volunteering for permanent commission.
Aren't you losing men?
We are losing men too, but men is a cross section. Here the population is very well defined in terms of women. So it's sad, but those who are doing the best are also seeking a better work-life balance.
So there's a reason why you don't lose men to that extent, and that is because the men feel that they've got promotional avenues to occupy the highest appointments, whereas the women see them being limited midway. So I mean,
no, I don't think so. I don't think that is the factor. I think women know that if they perform well, they'll get equal opportunity. There's a commanding officer who is commanding a combat unit, a group captain, lady officer of the Indian Air Force. She has risen there purely on merit.
Yeah, that is,
and absolutely nothing to do with any this thing. And combat units, they go and deploy in the field. They live in tents. They live in, the first time when we wanted to deploy a radar with women officers, we were really worried that, what is going to happen there in the middle of the desert, blah, 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 3 tents, hardly 10, 15 people. What's going to happen? There's going to be some sexual harassment, some other incident, some that, some this, that. But we said, okay, let it go. We'll watch it carefully and we'll see what has happened. We'll get the feedback, whatever it is, and we'll just see. So it has happened. We've been given opportunities and they have stepped up. So that's
Thank you so much. Miran, I want, because you're coming from a force which has had gender integration for several decades. Could you share with us the problem of sexual harassment and exploitation, which we, now this is of course within the police force, and I'm trying to extrapolate it onto the CAPF as well as the the Army, the Air Force and the Navy, particularly in this, because this has been a major issue that has inhibited the retention of women. It's been a major issue in the militaries across the world. And I want to hear a quote, our finance minister, who speaking in Parliament justified the increasing induction of women through the Agniveer scheme process of military police, because she said gendered violence within the forces was becoming a major issue and that they needed more women military police to tackle it. So evidently, this is a problem that has been perhaps silenced, particularly now as we get induction of soldiers from women soldiers in other ranks, not only officers, this could become a much greater problem. So what has been your experience?
Uh, so we conducted a study on women working in police stations in Maharashtra, and we took the sample was about 450 constable level officers and 150 sub inspector, all women constables and women sub inspectors. So what emerged was work environment is not friendly, gender equality and gender respect they felt was low in police stations, and the house was divided, the sample was divided about the cooperation they were receiving from the male counterparts in the police station doing field duty. Now, we had defined gender friendliness as work environment, gender respect, gender equality, and cooperation. But during this survey, during this research, which was headed by the head of the department of Pune University, we found, this was 2016, we found that women had flagged the issue of sexual harassment at workplace. But the HOD felt, since in the definition of gender friendliness, we had not designed any questions about that, but it was emerging, he felt we should do another study, which I am not aware whether Maharashtra Police has done or not. So at one place, I am with a sample of about 450, this issue of sexual harassment was flagged. Recently, I was conducting a training in Delhi Police where the officers were unanimous that they are being held hostages by women staff, that in case they want them to work as per the requirement of the police station, they felt threatened with the applications, inquiries and allegations about sexual harassment. So I saw two very different world. One where women are saying that they are being harassed, sexually harassed, and second where men are saying that in leadership position we are not able to take out the best work from the women staff because we are afraid. And they were able to substantiate some cases where they have faced this. So I think this issue requires much further study, and at the moment I have no data to either agree to X or to agree to Y. But I also felt, listening to the generals, that men are overthinking about how women will find their way and negotiate their way. I am saying our induction is given now. We will be everywhere. We cannot be wished away. But we will also find our way. So, accept us, invest in our training, and we will show you results at a much larger level than what you are even expecting. And once when I asked a huge, at different places, police field staff, what do you think about women police leaders? They were not from CAPFs, they were from police stations. They said something which I felt good about, something which I found really something different. They said women are professional, they are no nonsense, they are business-like, and like sir, what you said, they have no time to gossip, they have to rush home to look after the families. But they said, and it came as such a pleasant surprise to me, they are very just by nature. They are just by nature. They treat us equally. They generally do not have favorites. So this came out very strongly. But about sexual harassment, sorry, I don't have any data.
Thank you so much. But I thought that was a great note to close on for the panel. So may I now invite Professor Anuradha Chenoy. Let me just say that this is just the first of what I hope will be many conversations on this subject of women in the security sector, of gendering the security sector, and we want multi-stakeholder perspectives, which is why we've had this uniformed panel. And now the discussants, at least two of the discussants, do not belong to the uniformed services.
Viscom, Meenakshi, Rita, distinguished panelists and friends. I'm really honored to be here in this. And quite frankly, I don't really feel out of place as an academic because, and what I'm going to do now, because there's been such a wide canvas which has been painted and almost all colors are there, everything is there. But as an academic, I'm going to just in these 3 minutes that I have, speak on two theoretical issues which women and the feminists are talking about when they talk about armed forces, security, etc. And these are the two ideologies. So I'm not talking about the armed forces, but I'm talking about the two ideologies of militarism and feminism. So, and this word militarization came up, especially from Meenakshi and Rita, who are major researchers on these issues. And here we need to distinguish when we as feminists, academics, etc., we critique militarism. It has nothing to do with our armed forces and armies, which are an essential part of state institutions. But what we talk about is that we resist militarism as an ideology or militarist values of force or as a cultural signifier, or that privileges asymmetry between femininity and masculinity, and when it is used in civil society, when it is used in society. So what we oppose is the ideology of militarism when used in civil society, which we believe is a force where the talk should be about conversation, negotiation, peace, etc. So militarism and military are different, and I don't think we should conflate the two. So when we talk about a militarized society, I think the most recent example which comes to me is what the Israeli football people did in Amsterdam. That was a sense of militarized people. It had nothing to do with the conflict or war, but it was something to do with the anger against losing and hitting and violence in a society after a football match. And that is what we oppose. The second is there's a major debate amongst feminists, and in these 2 minutes that I have, that's what I want to attend to. And that is a debate between the liberal, especially Western feminists, and the feminists which are emerging organically, many from the global South, especially in Latin America, etc., where the feminists from the North, and I think we have gained from that, I'm not opposing it fully, is they talk about the women's politics of inclusion, representation, that women must be represented. That is representation and the resources which should go for this representation and the right they have as 50% of the population to be part of every institution. But on the other hand, many feminists from the global South, they're talking about a feminism of rupture, in which they say that this kind of Western feminism which has come up and which is being so popularized, where you have people like, let's say, Madeleine Albright or Hillary Clinton talking about themselves as feminists, but their policies harm other women in irreversible ways, in very long ways. And they said this feminism of rupture is what we would also like, that's part of the debate. So it's not that all feminists are now saying that women should be equally represented, but they should have this choice where many of them and believe in this feminism of rupture, where they don't want to be part of certain professions which harm others. And part of this also is a politics of exclusion, So while they say that Western feminists, for example, talk about feminists being included, but yet for all this while they exclude the entire global south. So what kind of feminism is that? So we'd rather have a non-feminist foreign policy or a non-feminist kind of thing, which actually institutionalizes, some of the things you said, where women are included gradually and methods are incorporated for this inclusion, as opposed to having this brand that now the army has become feminist or the state has become feminist or the foreign policy has become feminist. We don't want that kind of co-optation where women are pushed into these traditionally masculinist or aggressive roles. So I leave it at this question of what kind of choice you want to make and what kind of feminism you want to opt for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, in a few months, there is going to be a much more intensive dialogue in which I hope that you will join us and elaborate far more on some of the extremely important points that you raised. May I invite Dr. Smriti Patnaik to also speak on this as a discussant?
Thank you, Rita, and thank you, Dr. Gopinath. In fact, I'm not eminently suitable to speak on this particular topic, which speaks about the women in the armed force. What I want to say that when we speak about the role, the expectation within the armed force regarding what kind of role the women should play and the response which, Air Marshal spoke about, that the women wanted to go on particular kind of role. They didn't want to get into the maintenance. I think it comes from a kind of gendered kind of role which has been prescribed. So everybody wants to get out of that prescribed role to say that we would like to take the challenge. Therefore, we would not like to do this, but do this because that is not expected. And this is something which is new. And many of the things which we are also speaking of here is something which also comes out of the society. This entire way we look at role of women in a very gendered way also comes from how we are brought up and how each of the role is gendered. What kind of role you can play, what kind of role you cannot, what is safe, what is not safe. And I think that actually is something that grows in your mind, and therefore when you evaluate a woman's role in terms of what they can do, they can't do, or saying that, oh no, we examined and they were excellent in this. So that means there is a hypothesis inherent in that there was an expectation, probably they will not excel. So therefore we recognize them excelling in a particular role because we have that hypothesis within us of evaluating a person and saying that, these are the kind of role a person cannot do. And I think I would not blame, how this particular perspective is coming about. What I will say is that all of us, we are part of the society. All of us, we have been brought up by the society. And mostly when you are, growing up, half of the time, the role inside your family is also gendered. You have to cook, you have to clean, so therefore, when any institution takes a particular perspective of role of women, I think it also comes out the way we are brought up. And therefore, the evaluation needs to be very gender neutral. The evaluation cannot be, gendered to say that, okay, they're good in this, they're bad in this. We don't say that for the men. We don't say they're good in this. Because there is an expectation inherent that they will be good. The women will be bad, so therefore, the evaluation process come up. And when we say that, the woman is good, and that is what, when I was listening to all of you, I was trying to think that why this sentence that, this person, is good, we evaluated, we thought, okay, they can do this job, they can't do this job. So I think that comes from that kind of, socialization process, and probably as the society changes over the period of time through education, through, some of the advertisement these days also doesn't speak of the gendered kind of role. They want to say, in the schools also, this is something also which is being incorporated where it says that the washing machine can be operated by a boy. So the moment this kind of thing changes, I think probably that will reflect on the larger manifestation which we see in various institutions in our country. So I would hope that things are going to change and not remain same. As the women try to break the barrier, I think the only thing ma'am also spoke about, the providing an equal opportunity, not making it gendered. Provide the opportunity, let them prove it. If they can do it, why not? Rather than saying that, no, it is a gendered role, so therefore you should not be in this or that. I just end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I invite Monu Bhagat, General Monu Bhagat, to speak, please?
Thank you very much. Nice to be here on your 25th year of centenary of work, trying to promote peace and women. And as far as women are concerned, I see no difference between a man or woman, but for two biological differences, which is that we can't produce babies and you can produce babies. That's one of the major differences. That's the fact. The rest we are all similar in our constitution, whether it's brains or the toe, or hands or anything. Determination, courage, all these are psychological factors. You can't define them. It depends person to person, background, training, so many things come into play. So you got to consider all this. Where I find a problem is the lack of knowledge of the military to the people in civil life. I, having been in the army for 38 years, don't understand the army fully even today. It's so extensive that in your entire 38 or 40 years of service, you don't get to see the whole army in every form that it is in. But every person in the army has a role to perform. It is a role-oriented army as brought out by the general. And the smallest role is of a team of 3, the subgroup of a section, be it MMG detachment or a OP or observation post or something. Now you got to create all these conditions when you get women into the armed forces. Just saying let's have women in the armed forces doesn't work. It's not something it will just come like that. Yes, women will come, but then thereafter how are they going to perform? You got to create the infrastructure. That takes time. You got to provide the training. That takes time. You got to think what kind of training, what kind of roles, what kind of, let's say, like somebody rightly brought out, again, one of the panelists, it's all teamwork in the armed forces. There's nothing that you do alone. Even decision making or planning is teamwork. As a Air Marshal, I'm sure he doesn't think alone, or he didn't think alone. He had a team. Am I right, sir?
Absolutely.
So there's nothing that you do alone. You work in close proximity. That has a danger of sexual exploitation. Well, you face it. You have women, they become PWs, you will be butchered. Well, you face it. If you want to join as a frontline combat soldier, so be it. We are not stopping you. We are not against army women joining armed forces. Firstly, believe me, nobody in the armed forces against women joining the armed forces. They'll welcome them, provided you create conditions which are conducive to having women in the armed forces. Not to have them, but to perform. And perform at an equal level, because nobody can be left behind. If you're crossing a minefield, one woman gets blown up, she loses half a leg. The rest of the section is not going to wait for her. They have to cross the minefield at the last 100 meters before you get onto the enemy line. Otherwise, all 10 of you will be killed. So do you save that one woman or do you take her along with you? If you take her along with you, you 10 go, because you will not be able to run across the minefield. If you leave her behind, she gets killed. So what do? These are all difficult decisions which have to be all thought of how to deal with them. How does the army work? What is the environment? What are the risks? How does the enemy deal with them? Well, as you rightly said, somebody brought out, if you become a PW, you'll be raped, you'll be God knows what all. It all depends. Training is that it should not happen. You will be treated like the Geneva Conventions dictate. Just ask the name, number, and that's all. But it doesn't happen that way. In reality, it's an opportunity that time of a helpless woman taken prisoner who cannot defend herself, and the moment will be exploited by any enemy. If you remember, Marshal Zhukov after the victory in World War II, told the Russian army, go, kill their men and take their women. Well, not a statement to be made, but it was made. So I'm just trying to illustrate at that time how people think of motivating because they're under heavy stress. And the psychological factors have a great role to play. Now, physical fitness is not that you have to jump 8 feet, pit across, and if you can do it, you're fit. And if you can't, you are not fit. There's no requirement. The pilot doesn't jump 8 feet when she's in the cockpit. She's flying an aircraft. It's just the physical and mental stamina or the courage to jump across that pit. And the behavior pattern is seen at the selection. When you come, do you hesitate? Do you jump? Do you go down? Do you fall and get up again? All these things are studied in your human behavior. Are you fit for the armed forces or not? How will you react when such adversities come your way? In battle, anything can happen. Battle is not dictated by books. The army also has any amount of variations of war. Armies are not raised for peacekeeping. And peacekeeping is done by the armed forces because they are trained. It's one of the variations of war. And you are trained in every variation of war. So there's immense amount of training. That's why the whole year we are having courses. We do any amount of courses, any amount of training. Everybody says, you guys only drink and eat and rest and sleep and womanize. That's what they think. The general impression is that nobody womanizes in the armed forces just for the sake of it.
Sir, you will have to close.
So that's what I just want to say. It's a lack of understanding. The media is totally clueless on what the armed forces are, and they mislead. They sensationalize. One rape happens are not going to come down. It happens in any society. It will happen even when Secretary General will rape a woman if he gets the opportunity. I can tell you this. The Secretary General of the UN will also rape when he gets an opportunity. It's a matter of opportunity,
I
chance.
object to that.
Okay. Done. Sorry, I take my words back. I think I went a bit too far in trying to explain that.
Well, I will give you an opportunity to.
But
Okay,
he
I
has
take
withdrawn
my
the
word
words,
back.
that's fine.
Okay.
I've probably overstepped in giving that illustration. But what I'm saying is a matter of chance and opportunity and how strong you are as a human being.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The forum is now open for questions. I see one hand already, and that is General Banerjee. But please make your questions short or comments short. Thank you.
Having been too long in this field of debate and discussion, I should know better than to ask for the floor even for 2 minutes at the end of a conference. But having participated today in one of Dr. Gopinath's inspiring seminars and symposiums, one cannot but help being inspired to aptly at least make a small contribution. This is one of the vital issues confronting us today. The topic that you have addressed here is women and security sector. It is more than women and militarization or women's active inclusion in the military elements of war fighting, but in the larger context of women and security sector. Claire Short in UK tried to define this and broaden the study of security sector when, as the Secretary of DFID in the UK, she developed this concept of security sector in the widest form to contextualize the study of security in all its various elements. I and my institute was a part of that global endeavor for quite a few years, King's College London, etc., etc. It is in that context, in the larger involvement of women in managing security, conflict management, and peace, and in all its varieties, all its complexities, and all its enormous challenges, it should come as no surprise that the women cannot be left out of this debate. Fortunately, the argument is coming back that women must have more and more say, a role in the whole security sector management. And it's in that context that I would suggest that we look at these issues in future. Yes, in the Indian Army, the militarization or the inclusion of the women in military affairs and military conduct in operations, etc., has expanded enormously and is in a direction, I think, which is moving in a favorable way. But for example, just today you will go back and hear the name of the Secretary of Defense in the USA, General Peter Esguth. I've known him, I think I've got his name correct. I've known him a bit earlier, veteran of Afghanistan wars, Iraq wars, etc., etc. He is one person who does not believe that the women should have any role in the US armed forces. Of course, that might change even between now and 20th of January when Donald Trump takes over as the president of the US. But we are perhaps moving in that direction. Now, today, fortunately, one does not look at the USA for positive examples. So quite often, it is what it does that we should try and avoid. And perhaps that is one direction that we might consider adopting in our context and in our conditions. And it is in that perspective, the alternative thinking about peace, what constitutes real security, not just in nation states, but regionally and globally, are what are the fundamental questions that confront us today. And I would suggest, Mr. Gopinath, having known you for some years, you're poised in a very appropriate moment in Indian history, perhaps, to take a role in setting out a new agenda, not just for India, but also show direction to the world as to what are the new ways, new methods, and new tasks that we need to address in order to address the global conditions as they're emerging. It is about the worst time in history, the last few hundred years, that we are poised with enormous quantities of weapons of mass destruction ready for use at moment's notice. A few of those weapons, if they go off in whatever manner or method are used, will mean not just the end of the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, but the end of the earth.
Sir, you will have to close.
Yes, and so therefore, I would suggest, please look into some of these issues, and this is a broader context in which we need to contextualize the role of women in security and security sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have an yes? No, the young lady, yes? Do introduce yourself.
My name is Avni Sabluk and I'm from Indian Council of World Affairs. So, Sir pointed out, many of the female officers take maternity leave, and after that, because the topic says being rearmed, armed and then rearmed. So, do we look at counseling and incorporating them, getting them back in their services again after taking a maternity leave? Because that's one option why women are moving toward the corporate sector, because they provide you better chances at having a maternity leave for a longer duration and then join in again in the corporate sector, one thing. And then the other thing is that we carry a load of this patriarchal mindset in us, like through generations. I've actually seen, and I've worked on gender issues, and I've seen how women through generations have been carrying out some sort of a patriarchal mindset throughout their lives. So do we consider counseling as one of the options when it comes to these services? Thanks.
Okay, what we'll do is we'll take a few questions because we're running out of time. So yes, and then I will come back to you, sir. Do introduce yourself.
My name is Amber Ahmed. I teach at Kamla Nehru College. So this is something in relation to what Professor Chinoy just said, and I was really, because while the entire discussion was going on, my mind kept going back to Lindy, England, and the Abu Ghraib
Yes.
atrocities. At this moment, women in the Israeli military perpetrating various degrees of sexual assault, which is then being videotaped and circulated on social media upon the Palestinian detainees. Also in the social media, this entire narrative of a particular kind of feminism, right, which seems to be a feminism of exploitation and domination, right? So it's like almost like saying that, okay, if men can be aggressive and they can perpetrate all these atrocities, we can also absolutely do the same. What I am left grappling with in this discussion is to be feminist, to be able to imagine yourself at the marginality of every power center, and then to be able to negotiate that, or is to be feminist simply to add women and stir in the military? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, sir, you had raised your hand.
Yes. Sensei Raj, founder of Global Changemakers Network. First of all, I would like to applaud and acknowledge what Dr. Neil said. You need women.
A little louder, sir.
No.
Can you hear me? Okay. Sensei Raj, founder of Global Changemakers Network. In fact, I've had field experience right in Ukraine where you did mention the percentage of women is actually much more higher. What the ChatGPT does give you is very skewed. Because I do have Intel network right in Ukraine, every single hour I get Intel from there. But the point of the matter is, they are using women, of course, even in the front as well. But the larger question that I would like to put across is that, are we using women to militarize the entire approach to the human race, or are we having a responsible blueprint to our human evolution at all? Within the framework of the law enforcement, the armed forces, and the security of our existence, to the lack of a better term. I'll give you one example is that 27 years in human trafficking or anti-human trafficking, you find women are more within the system who can stand up, fight, bringing in justness, as you mentioned, which is absolutely true. I back you on that. The resilience which is found and the innovativeness that you would have. In fact, I have in my own team, we have 5 women who are running operations across the world. Track and trace is I think most people who are into the security industry would understand, where women are more suited to this job rather than men. I'll rest my case with it.
Okay, there was somebody there who raised their hand. Yes, sir.
My name is Rajiv Mehrotra, and I work with the Foundation for Universal Responsibility, and I'm married to a feminist and consider myself one. Well, I think to me, it seems that the elephant in the room is really an issue that Dr. Miran mentioned in passing when she said women's intelligence, and at another point she just mentioned the thought that the special skills that women had. So I was just wondering how that gets reconciled in terms of public policy and implementing what seemed to be the universal aspiration of everyone here. And I mean, I should just add as a little aside that what I really wanted her to talk about was I heard her on this wonderful television interview when she was talking about overhearing a conversation between 2 mafia dons and who the third person was. She mentioned it, but I will not raise this here.
This might be for tea time.
Just sort of in passing, Dr. Banerjee is absolutely right. We just have 50 minutes ago a statement from the U.S. Defense Secretary designate to saying that women in combat roles in the armed forces are unacceptable, and they only complicate matters and diminish our abilities and effectiveness. And that's why I'm particularly interested in what Dr. Miran had to say about women's intelligence and special abilities.
Thank you. Yes?
Hi, my name is Kavita, and I've done my master's from JNU from the School of International Studies, and currently work at the Danish Embassy as part of their political team. So the panelists have mentioned and have highlighted that women get more affected by the lack of work-life balance. My question is that are the defense forces doing something to improve work-life balance for both men or women, or is it mainly going to be status quo? Because from what I see in the gender society of ours, where care work is mainly feminized, defense will continue to be less lucrative for women, less lucrative job for women if it continues to be, they continue to be burdened by the dual work. So what is Air Force or Army or even police doing to ensure work-life balance or to lessen the gendered care work? And I'm also asking this question with a focus on women who are spouses to men in defense forces, not necessarily a soldier themselves. Because in reality, the huge work-life balance continues to unduly burden these women with household work and impacting their careers, where they have to put themselves secondary. And so is it going to continue business as usual when it comes to work-life balance? Because defense forces will then continue not only to be less lucrative job for women, but also for men who care for their female partners in their careers.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. This is Vaishnavi Verma, currently a third year economics student from D.D. Shram College and also a founder for Climate Cadets Collective, which is a youth-led organization. Basically, I was hearing, sir, and as I'm an economics student and the college placement is going on, and truly, sir, I do not want to go in corporate sector for sure. But there's this question that I have for you, that basically corporate sector and armed forces are two different worlds altogether, right? Like there are different skill sets which are required. So how does this statement making a little more sense in that sector? Also, the question is, like in today's world of technology, where it is becoming very difficult even for men to be that much physically active because they are more into these gamings and so much of distractions are there for today's youth basically. So how to tackle that? And second, for Miran ma'am, it was really so motivational to hear you. And I have a question, just like asking. I think when you were just working on, you might be coming. You were coming across some some statements like, how can someone be at that position? So I think communication is the key in that sense, right? So you must have communicated. No, this is how I can do this. So I really want you to share some on that aspect, like how you made yourself clear at that aspect, like this is the way I'm going to do this. So that doesn't make sense.
Okay, last question. Is there a last question? Yes, and that's the last.
Hello everyone. Thank you to all the panelists for great presentations. I am Kiran, a PhD candidate in JNU School of International Studies. My question was mostly about whenever, and it has been mentioned by members in the panel too, that when about women in war is talked about, we talk about women being taken as prisoner of war and the kind of harm that can come across their way. But we live in a country where we have had those kind of atrocities being happening with women who are just civilians. Let's take the Kolkata rape case or Delhi rape case. So it's not about making that violence okay or normalizing it, but how far is it okay to say that? Because when women get into armed force, I think they are pretty much aware that these are the possibilities. So why do we make it a special case when that perhaps has somehow become the norm in this country? Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to ask Miran to answer, to respond first. Not necessarily, I mean, just take whichever, whatever you remember, whatever question was particularly addressed to you, or your last comments. And you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So as far as work-life balance is concerned, we are trying to sensitize both male officers, male staff, that these are the issues which women face and how to handle them in a compassionate, empathic way without compromising with professionalism. And we are also talking to women that now that you have joined the force, you cannot what is termed as keep giving excuses. So for this work-life balance, a lot of effort by state police and CAPFs, they are undertaking that.
Maternity leave?
So maternity leave, I don't think it's an issue. It's a very accepted fact of life. And now police officers, even if they had some reservations, I think they have accepted that. It's not an issue that 3 women were on maternity leave and you didn't tell us. That has been very well accepted because we are 12% of civil police and 4% of CAPF may still have issue. At least police station level, it's an accepted fact. And sir, I also felt that women going in not for maintenance was probably also because they're young and they want some challenges. What emerged in the study which I quoted, 450 constables and officers, the younger lot wanted more outdoor duties, wanted patrolling, and the elder lot wanted more police station duty like computers. So I felt that could be an issue there. And as far as my communication, I felt that discussing very freely and frankly with the staff. And there's a concept, I mean, I'm not a management student, but I've heard where the leader makes her staff feel that she is also vulnerable, elicits very good suggestions. So I felt, okay, I am in this chair as the Commissioner of Police, but you know Pune more than me because I am here for some time and you are working here for last 30 years. Can you suggest how we do that? So by having very free and frank discussions, I got such good suggestions which would not have come to me. And so the third person in the conversation, please read Madam Commissioner.
No, but what about women intelligence, or what are the values that women particularly bring?
As male officers told me, they find them very focused on the job. They may find some fault that they also try to run back to homes where they have other round of duties. Women are focused. In various police surveys, it has been found that in community policing, in relating to community and finding solutions, which our beat constables are attending to every day, solving the beat issues, they are better. Conflict resolution, they are better. Participative leadership, they are better. Though sometimes men think it's a weak point because they elicit suggestion, because they allow everybody to talk. Sometimes it's considered weakness, but participatory style of conflict management, attending to the duties of the weaker and marginalized sections of society, women in civil police are considered assets. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Emma?
So thank you for your question on maternity leave. There's no need for counseling. Please, it's a personal choice or to have what kind of family you want to have. That's not the issue. The issue that I was trying to bring out was that if 4 people, it's by chance that 4 people landed up on maternity leave at the same time. The question is, it was an HR issue which should have been solved in an HR way and not an operational issue. So if you mishandle an HR issue, you could land up in an operational issue. That was my point. So there's absolutely no bar on counseling, no need for counseling on what size of family anybody wishes to have. It's a free country and you are entitled to maternity leave and you must take maternity leave. I mean, that is the way I look at it. I don't discourage anybody from taking maternity leave. Question is, the commanding officer has X amount of resources. He suddenly finds a large number of them depleted. He should do something about it. Find a solution. Okay. And if he can't find a solution, seek help. It's as simple as that. So that was the point that I was trying to make from that example. But I do want to point out one thing. Piloting. It's a skill. You take long breaks, you lose the skill. It's a perishable skill.
So my question was actually how after maternity leave, you were just answering it, like how do you incorporate them back into the service?
No. So nobody can stop father time. Everything else can be solved. Okay, so there is a finite period, and everybody knows the pros and cons of it and takes a decision accordingly. And if for that moment that person has to prioritize raising a family, so be it. We help to the extent that is possible. The moment a pilot in the Indian Air Force declares that she is pregnant or her test comes positive, she has to stop flying. She has to be taken out of the cockpit because to the threat to the unborn baby, basically. All right? And so she starts those skills which she had gained and were going up are now plateauing and then coming down. So we can help her by making her fly the simulator. Today simulators are, in the past that was not the case. Today simulators are there, so we can keep some of the skills alive, but some of the skills have to be hands-on. So when she comes back, we'll give her additional sorties, more these things to get her skills back. But 2 years, her male counterparts have gone past. Okay, now that's something you can't help. What do you do about it? So there are people who make difficult choices, take only 6 months of maternity leave, find grandparents who will raise the child. They'll find solutions. They'll navigate their way, like she said. Okay, it's all dependent. It's all very individualistic, and there is absolutely nothing wrong in taking maternity leave or planning a family. It's just that many times you perhaps have to time it well, and also luck has to be a little bit on your side so that everything else goes as the way you planned. The other question about is feminism simply add women and stir? I don't think so. I think women have a role to play in the armed forces. They are there. They're going to continue to expand. But at the core essence of armed forces is volunteerism. You may be eminently suited to join the armed forces, but you may not wish to because your interests are different. So firstly, volunteerism. And we've seen in our studies of all our things, the number finally stabilizes around 20%. It doesn't go to the 33% that we really desire, except in the Israeli military because there is compulsory military service. Therefore, it's this thing. And your point about, women acting badly, like the Abu Ghraib, and it's all very valid. It's all very gender neutral. It's nothing to do with gender. Cruelty, bad habits, poor conduct is gender agnostic. And incidentally, prisoners of war, we keep talking about, somebody raised this issue of rape, this, that, the other. Men also get raped. Okay, as prisoners of war, they also face sexual violence. So it's very gender neutral. And you're right. Why we worry? The problem today is that if you use the gender as a weapon, releasing the women prisoners last, that becomes an issue. Okay, so that's the other part that I was kind of talking about. And somebody raised the question of corporate and armed forces are different. They're not different. Believe you me, the most desirable skill in both the armed forces and corporate world is leadership. Okay, so if you're looking at being a leader, that's why people from the armed forces are successful in the corporate world, those who join the corporate world early enough. Some people age out. Okay, and therefore, you can't join at very high levels. But the key quality that the corporate world looks from a retiring or a person who's coming out at middle management level, say after short service commission, is leadership. And if you can demonstrate leadership, you will be successful in the corporate sector as well. How are men being kept physically fit? Somebody asked that question. Gaming or no gaming? You have to remain fit. That's it.
I think we just... So
I was trying to address all the questions that were asked. So.
No, I think all the questions have been addressed to a degree. And it's just my time, just to close up. But, my wife, when I came here today, she said, work-life balance is very easy for a man, because he ignores all his other responsibilities. It's very difficult for a woman. She can't ignore the responsibilities. That's what she told me. She said that's the crux. And the other thing she said is something that hasn't come up. She says, for a woman to just conform, to listen to orders is more difficult. We always question. Unlike men, you just obey, blind obedience. So, I mean, that's something. I mean, that's her perspective. And in the army, you know, we are ruled by an Army Act. And in that Army Act, there's a section under which they say, disobeying lawful command. So now who am I to question what is lawful, what is unlawful? Because if my superior tells me something, I consider it lawful. Later on, you can challenge it in court, whether it was lawful or unlawful. But at that point of time, there's something called blind obedience back to, into the valley of death, the 600. I mean, that's the actual fact of ground. And last point, he brought out, everybody has this opinion, and I've been, arguing against it time and time again, that armed forces have particular skill sets only suited for conducting war and violence, and they're unsuitable anywhere else. Please look around you. In all walks of life, armed forces personnel have done extremely, extremely well. I'm not here to go into things, but from my own unit, I can say that people who've transited to the private sector, people who've been elsewhere, they have done extremely well. We've had a JCO from our unit who became a minister, who would have won elections. We've had an officer who's started the biggest land company in Delhi, DLF, and we've had an officer from our unit who headed ONGC. I mean, what can be bigger than this? So, I mean, these are the things. So, it's totally a misnomer that we are unsuited for other job than
I second you, General, because I come from Maharashtra, Pune and Mumbai. All corporate sectors, they look for and are very fond of having army officers, and not only corporate sector, universities in Maharashtra. Yes, they welcome army officers. So,
but back to your, work life, and I'll tell you a very interesting anecdote. I mean, I'll end with that. So I had an officer in my unit serving under me, and his wife was in the army, but as a doctor. And you get what they call a spouse posting. But let me tell you, for both of them to manage their postings with individual times and all, it was very difficult. So our unit was once in Pathankot. She was posted in the military hospital in Pathankot. But their timings and how much time they could spend together in the day, it was totally unregulated, because she had to be on duty at particular times in the MH. And, he had his own commitments going out on exercise. So there are huge challenges as far as work-life balance in the army goes. And bulk of you will not realize that an average time for a soldier in the army, he only gets one tenure to stay with his family for about 3 to 5 years. That is the reality. There's not much accommodation. You do this field peace postings. I mean, you're trying to increase the number of family, quarters, but it takes time. And the units have deployments outside. So, I mean, so you can imagine in a working life of about 20 years, you stay 2 years or 3 years. And in General Dipankar was here, he's left. Gorkhas, it's even less, That's the fact.
Okay, I am going to, I think we've already run out of time. Seema, we've run out of time? Sorry about this. But thank you so much. Thank the panelists, the discussants, as well as all of you for making this a very, very active, meaningful discussion. And as I mentioned to you, there will be a follow-up which will be more focused, more intensive, and I hope several of you will be involved in that process. Thank you once again to all of you, and thank you to WISCOM to enabling this. And I think there is...
And IIC also.
IIC, yes. Thank you, IIC. Thank you, WISCOM. And I think Seema is going to give you the last cherry.
Very, very quickly, since Rita has already thanked the panelists, thank you so much, Marshal Rajesh Kumar. Thank you, Dr. Miran Chadha. Thank you, General Jagatveer Singh. It was really, and I must thank General Bhagat, and although Anu and Smriti had other commitments and they had to leave, but I'd like to thank everybody. Rita particularly for steering the discussion and for curating the program with the Viscom. For me personally, working with Rita was a special learning, working on the volume of peace prints with you, Rita. So thank you so much. Thank you to IIC, Srivastav Saab, who was here, who joined, and Tete of the programs division. We also thank all the tech support and the staff of IIC who have been really, really going out of their way at most of Viscom's at all of the Viscom's programs, collaborative and otherwise. We appreciate each member's contribution. Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Mehrotra and Foundation for Universal Responsibility. Sir, you are our guiding light all the time. Thank you. Dr. Gopinath, ma'am, for sowing the seeds of this idea. I remember this was in 2022 when the Agnipath scheme was launched, actually. And MG's first reaction was, we must look at how women are going to then, are they going to join through this scheme, and how many, why, let's explore this. And feel really happy that the journal volume actually went way beyond the idea of women's formal representation and operational effectiveness alone to look at a whole gamut of other issues, including the issue of army officers' wives and what they face, peacekeeping, sexual harassment, and all of the other issues that have been flagged by the panelists today. So I hope it's an open access journal. It can be accessed by anybody online. The URL is listed outside, so urge all of you to look at the journal. Thank you also to my colleague Akash Leena, who has been on her toes since we scheduled this panel discussion, and our other colleagues at Viscomp and Foundation, Kiran Koshi, Tenzin Legman, who designed that beautiful, poster, I want to call it, actually, production, which is there outside, if you will see women marching. So thank you to him, and Shri Kumari and Diksha Podar, Jyoti and Devinder Kumar, and most importantly, to all of you for being here and for staying so late. We should have provided dinner, I guess, since we made it so late. But a humble cup of tea for everyone. Thank you, and hope to see you at the follow-up discussion.
Thank you very much.
Okay.